The dog that changed everything wasn't even my patient. She belonged to an Amish family about 40 minutes outside of Millersburg, Ohio. Old Jacob Troyer had been bringing his farm dogs to me since 1987, not for checkups. The Amish don't really do preventive checkups the way we do, but for the occasional injury, a cut paw, a broken toe from a tractor wheel. The kind of thing you couldn't set yourself. In 15 years of seeing Jacob's dogs, I never once treated one for cancer. Not one. I treated arthritis twice, minor stuff. But I watched 8, 9, 10 dogs live to 14, 15, 16 years old and die quietly of old age, not cancer, not organ failure from a kibble diet, old age. Meanwhile, back in town, I was putting down 2, 3 dogs a month from cancer, dogs that were 7, 8 years old, dogs that had eaten every premium bag their owners could afford, dogs that had been vaccinated on schedule, treated with the best flea preventives on the market, taken in for their annual blood work, and they were dying young, and nobody could tell me why. I finally asked Jacob about it one afternoon in 1999. We were standing in his barn. He looked at me like I'd asked him why the sun rises in the east. He said, "Doc, we just feed them what we've always fed them." And then he showed me. What he showed me that afternoon contradicted almost everything I had been told in veterinary school about animal nutrition. And I've spent the last 25 years trying to figure out who benefits from that contradiction. I think you already know the answer. There's a reason 1 in 2 dogs in this country will develop cancer in their lifetime. That number is from the American Veterinary Medical Association, and they've been sitting on it for years without asking the obvious question, why is it higher than human cancer rates? Why is it accelerating? And why does it almost never happen in communities that have never touched commercial pet food? The answer starts with something called aflatoxin. And before I explain what that is, I want you to think about the bag of food sitting next to your dog's bowl right now, because there's a very good chance it contains something the FDA found in a formal recall notice, something that's a known carcinogen, something that Purina Hills and the rest of them have paid lobbyists to keep off the front of the label. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly why Amish dogs don't get cancer and exactly what you can feed your dog for about $3 that replaces what you've been paying $30, $40, $60 a bag for. Jacob's dogs ate table food. Not processed, not supplemented, not engineered by a corporation with a quarterly earnings report to protect boiled chicken, cooked eggs, raw carrots, beef fat skimmed from the soup pot, oats soaked overnight, whatever the family had. Jacob's wife told me she'd throw in a handful of dried herbs, sometimes parsley, thyme, because her grandmother had always done it and the dog's coats looked better for it. That's it. No bag, no kibble, no ingredient list that takes a chemistry degree to read. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, that sounds too simple. You're thinking that surely the companies that employ PhD nutritionists and run clinical trials know more about your dog's diet than an Amish farmer in rural Ohio. And I understand why you'd think that. I thought the same thing for the first 20 years of my practice. But here's the problem with that assumption. The companies running those trials are the same companies selling you the food, the same companies funding the veterinary school nutrition departments, the same companies whose logo is on the bowl in your vet's waiting room. There's a paper I read years back in JAVMA, the Journal of the American Veterinary Medical Association, that noted nearly 70% of veterinary nutrition research was funded by pet food manufacturers. 70%. Think about what that means for what you're being told is healthy. And here's where aflatoxin comes in, because this is the part they don't want you reading on the label. Aflatoxin is a mold-based toxin, a mycotoxin that grows on corn, wheat, and soy, specifically when those grains are stored improperly, which in the industrial supply chain happens more than anyone admits. It is classified by the World Health Organization as a Group 1 carcinogen. That means the evidence that it causes cancer in mammals is not theoretical, it is not a fringe claim. It is established, documented, and accepted by every major health regulatory body on Earth. Now here's what I want you to sit with for a moment. The 3 primary ingredients in most mass market kibble are corn, wheat, and soy. Purina Pro Plan, Hill's Science Diet, Royal Canin. The base of almost every one of those formulas is grain. Grain that travels through a global supply chain, stored in silos, exposed to heat and humidity, and by the time it reaches the manufacturing plant and gets extruded into that little pellet your dog eats twice a day, 365 days a year, the aflatoxin levels can be measurable. Not always at recall levels, but measurable. And your dog eats the same food every single day for 10 years. The FDA has issued formal aflatoxin recalls against multiple brands. I'm not speculating. Look up the 2020 to 2021 Sport Mix recall. 70 dogs died. Not were sickened. Died. And Sport Mix is not some fringe discount brand. It's manufactured by Midwestern Pet Foods, a company that's been in business for decades. But here's the thing the recall news never says. A recall happens when levels are acutely toxic. Acutely, when dogs are dying fast enough to make the number obvious. What the FDA doesn't regulate, what nobody is measuring on a rolling basis, is the chronic low-level exposure that happens every single day. Your dog eats a corn and soy-based kibble with grain sourced from the cheapest available supplier. Jacob's dogs don't eat corn. They never have. They eat food that comes from the same farm they live on, food that's whole, cooked, or raw, that hasn't sat in a warehouse for 6 months before going into a bag. And if you've ever lost a dog early, younger than 12, younger than 10, and the vet used the word cancer but couldn't quite explain why or where it came from, you already know the feeling I'm describing. That helpless feeling in the parking lot after. I've seen that face 1,000 times, more than 1,000. Now, let me tell you what Jacob's formula actually looks like, because it's not complicated and it's not expensive, and you don't need to source anything special to start tomorrow. The base is protein. Cooked chicken thighs, bone in, boiled until the meat falls off. You pull the meat, discard the cooked bones splinter, that part matters, and you save the broth. That broth is more nutritionally dense than anything that comes in a can. The meat gets shredded. For a medium-sized dog, a 30-pound dog, you're looking at about 3 to 4 ounces of shredded chicken per meal, twice a day. The second component is a starch. Not corn, not soy. Jacob used oats or sweet potato, depending on the season. Sweet potato is particularly good. It's low glycemic compared to white potato. It's loaded with beta-carotene, which is a powerful antioxidant, and dogs take to it naturally. You boil or bake the sweet potato, mash it without seasoning, and mix it in. About 2 tablespoons per meal for a 30-pound dog. The third component is fat and organ. This is the part most people skip, and it's the part that matters most. Dogs are not people, they need fat. Real animal fat, not plant-derived fat, not canola oil. The fat from the chicken broth poured over the meal gives them what their coat actually needs. Every 6 or 7 days, you add a small piece of cooked liver, chicken, or beef. Doesn't matter, no bigger than a silver dollar. Organ meat is where the micronutrients live. The zinc, the B vitamins, the iron that keeps their blood right. The pet food companies know this, which is why they list chicken liver flavor on the bag, not actual liver. Flavor, not the thing itself. The fourth component is the one Jacob's wife mentioned, herbs. Now, I want to be careful here, because not all herbs are safe for dogs. Garlic and onion are toxic at high doses, but parsley and thyme are safe, and both have documented antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory properties. A small pinch of dried parsley stirred into the meal 3 or 4 times a week. That's it. Not a supplement, not a capsule. A pinch of dried parsley from the jar in your spice rack that cost you $2 18 months ago and you've barely touched. The whole meal costs, for a medium dog, somewhere around $2 to $3 a day, depending on what protein you buy and whether you cook in batches. You cook a batch of chicken on Sunday, portion it out, and you're set for 4 days. Compare that to the $60 bag of Hill's Science Diet that your vet sells you from the shelf behind the reception desk, the same shelf that earns that clinic a markup of anywhere from 40 to 90% over wholesale cost. There's a reason your vet sells food. And it's not because they're the most qualified nutritionists in the room. It's because the margin on a bag of prescription kibble is the most reliable revenue line in the practice. A study cited by the AVMA noted that veterinary practices acquired by corporate chains and more than 30% of clinics in this country are now owned by private equity, owned by Mars or JAB or similar investment funds, show a consistent pattern of pushing prescription diets and branded supplements specifically because those products carry the highest margin. I'm not saying your vet is a bad person. Most of the veterinarians I knew were good people who genuinely loved animals, but they work inside a system that rewards certain behaviors, and the food recommendation is one of them. Now, I want to come back to the cancer question because I haven't finished with it. The Amish dog data isn't just anecdotal. A team out of the University of Chicago did something extraordinary a few years back. They studied the microbiome of Amish children compared to non Amish children living nearby and found dramatically lower rates of certain immune related conditions in the Amish group. The researchers pointed to food, environment, and the absence of industrial processing. Those findings haven't been replicated formally in dogs, but any veterinarian who's spent time in rural Amish adjacent communities can tell you the pattern is observable. Lower cancer rates, longer lives, fewer chronic conditions. The mechanism that researchers point to is inflammation. Chronic inflammation is the precursor to most canine cancers, particularly the lymphomas and mast cell tumors I was seeing in town, kept dogs fed commercial kibble. The aflatoxin I mentioned drives inflammation, but so does something else that's in almost every bag of major brand kibble, something called BHA and BHT, butylated hydroxyanisole, and butylated hydroxytoluene synthetic preservatives that are banned in human food in several countries but remain perfectly legal in pet food in the United States. The FDA classifies them as generally recognized as safe, but the National Toxicology Program has listed BHA as reasonably anticipated to be a human carcinogen, and your dog eats it daily. The Clean Label Project, which is an independent nonprofit that actually tests pet food products, found detectable levels of heavy metals, including lead and arsenic, and measurable aflatoxin contamination across multiple top-selling brands. This is not a fringe organization. Their methodology is sound. Look them up. The brands that failed their testing are the same brands on the shelf at your local big box store, the same brands your vet might have samples of in the waiting room. I want you to think about a dog you had maybe 20, 30 years ago, before the premium kibble explosion, before Science Diet and Royal Canin started buying shelf space in every veterinary clinic in the country. What did that dog eat? Most people I ask say table scraps, some cooked food, some raw, bones from the butcher, eggs from the yard, maybe a basic dry food that cost $5 and had 5 ingredients. And a lot of those dogs lived a long time. A 15-year Labrador wasn't unusual back then. A 16-year mutt wasn't something people wrote about on the internet because it wasn't remarkable yet. Now a 15-year Labrador is a story. Now people film it because we've quietly accepted that dogs dying at 9 or 10 from cancer is just what happens. It isn't what happens. It's what happens when you feed an animal a product designed not for their longevity, but for your repeat purchase. The formula I've laid out, the chicken, the sweet potato, the fat, the organ meat, the pinch of parsley, that's not a diet I invented. It's a diet that existed before there was a pet food industry. Before there was a reason to patent a formula and print a bag and hire a lobbyist to make sure it ended up in every veterinary school nutrition curriculum. If your dog has chronic itching, recurring ear infections, a dull coat, or episodes of vomiting with no clear cause, I want you to consider the possibility that the food is the diagnosis. Not a food allergy, necessarily. Not an exotic condition that requires a $400 ultrasound. Just the daily accumulation of inflammatory ingredients in a system that wasn't built for them. The switch doesn't have to be overnight. You can transition over 7 to 10 days, mixing the home cooked food with whatever kibble you're using now, decreasing the kibble by about 25% every 3 days. Watch the coat, watch the stool. It'll be different at first, firmer, smaller, because there's less filler. Watch the energy. Most people tell me they see a difference in 2 weeks. Not a miracle, not a cure. A dog that looks and smells and acts like a dog again. If your dog takes medication for any condition, and you're thinking about changing their diet substantially, talk to your vet about timing and whether there are any interactions to watch for. I say that not as a legal disclaimer, but as a doctor who knows that a protein-rich diet can sometimes affect the absorption of certain medications, and you want to make that transition thoughtfully. One more thing before I close. The reason I use the word illegal in framing this isn't hyperbole. in 2007, the American Association of Feed Control Officials, the body that sets standards for pet food ingredients, effectively made it impossible for manufacturers to market home-cooked food protocols as complete and balanced without going through a formulation and testing process that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. That process is accessible to Purina. It is not accessible to a farmer in Ohio who's been keeping dogs healthy for 200 years on boiled chicken and sweet potato. The regulatory structure, whether intentionally or not, makes the simple thing expensive to certify and the industrial thing cheap to sell. Jacob Troyer doesn't have a AAFCO certification. He just has dogs that live to 16. You can make your own decision about what that means. If the dogs that matter to you, your boy, your girl, whoever's sleeping at your feet right now, mean as much to you as my dogs meant to me, then stay with me. I put out a new video every day. I've got 38 years of clinical practice and a long memory for the things the industry has tried to make me forget, and I am just getting started.